This is Your Crisis Coach with Scott H. Silverman and Fred Carroll. Honest talk. For real issues with real solutions, where we talk about the hard to talk about. Here is your host, Fred Carroll.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to Your Crisis Coach with the great Scott H. Silverman, myself, Fred Carroll, and today we got our friend John who's going to join us. How are you today, John?
Fine, Fred. How are you? And hi, Scott.
Hey, good to see you, John. Thanks for being here with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's so Scott, how have you been enjoying, I'm going to call it the good weather, while me and John suffer greatly?
Well, it's actually, the mean temperature's dropped to 68 degrees, so we're a little concerned about it, but otherwise, we feel very, very lucky and very blessed. We have great climate here in Southern California, and when I look at the country, and I have a daughter in New York, so sometimes I don't call her when I see the weather's dropping below zero. It just doesn't, So we're real grateful, Fred. We're lucky that way. We don't have seasons, but I grew up in Southern California, so did my wife, so we're kind of used to it. And when it gets to 50, they start closing schools, and when it gets to 40, we all panic, and we don't start burning parts of the house to stay warm.
Yeah, well, that's what we were just discussing was oil prices. Living in an old house is no bargain at times. The my heating system just is not, I guess the word's optimal. It was installed December 10th, 1939.
Oh, man.
And it is old. If you go down in my basement, Scott, you would probably start freaking out because everything's wrapped in asbestos. Everything. That's how they did it back then. The ceiling tiles, the floor tiles, all asbestos. But that's neither here nor there. You don't care. You're just sitting there in your short sleeves, soaking in the sun and watching the waves of the Pacific Ocean. So why don't you move along?
Do you detect a little jealousy there, Scott?
Yeah. Well, and some harbored resentment and some untreated trauma. So it's okay, though.
It is.
Fred's like a brother from another mother, and we've actually never physically met. We've been doing this together for about 6 years now, and it's fun to compare notes. Opposites attract, and we certainly do that. So, John, it's really, really great to have you here today. We haven't seen each other well before COVID, and if I'm not mistaken, you were in San Diego and you spoke to our Society of Addiction Professionals.
I did. I was there promoting my book, Bullet in the Chamber, which deals with my son's heroin overdose death. It's a subplot in the book, which is the fourth book in a 6-book series and counting. And so I was out in San Diego promoting it. And
what year was that?
When we met. That would have been probably 2017.
Wow.
I know.
Yeah. And then that has been a while since we've seen each other. And I just saw you pop up on LinkedIn, I think it was, or social media somewhere, and you've got a couple of big events going on. So, John, a lot of our guests and listeners, they don't get out much. So, would you mind sharing a little bit about your history and things that everyone should know, would want to know, and maybe would be afraid to ask? And we'll let you just kind of take the mic and tell us all about John.
Well, thank you. I'm from La Crosse, Wisconsin, right along the Mississippi River in the heartland of the country. Grew up there. My dad was a lawyer. My mom was a teacher. And the plan was I was going to go into law and then politics. And I ended up, I was going to really get serious about politics, but I went into journalism instead and was a journalist for 45 years. Covered the White House when Reagan was president, worked at CNN for 25 years. The last 7 as one of Wolf Blitzer's editors on the Situation Room in D.C. And while I was at CNN, I started writing fiction because as an editor, it was tedious, but it paid well. And so I needed a creative outlet. And so over the last 20 years, I've got 6 mystery suspense thrillers in print. I retired from CNN in 2013 and moved to write full-time. But by that time, I was also a one-on-one writing coach, a manuscript editor, and I teach writing at literary centers, writers' conferences, around the country. And so, I basically have a second career. Um, two quick things just to add. The books are mystery suspense thrillers, but subplots have to do with grief and loss. My sister took her life in 1980, and so that's basically the first scene of Fast Track, which is the first novel. And then because it's a series, my protagonist, Lark Chadwick, has other griefs and losses along the way, including a boyfriend, which is modeled after my son's disappearance and death. And so I've incorporated some of those losses into the creative process as well. So that kind of brings us up to date.
So share a little bit about your story with your son, and just describe, the cover of, because I think the cover of that book really intrigued me originally. And I think that's how I reached out to you, because I thought it was I call it apropos.
Thank you. My screen is blurred, I think, a little bit. Well, I guess you can see it. The bullet in a syringe was an idea I got based on a dream. I woke up with that image. Stephen was missing at the time, but I knew heroin was going to be a factor. And I wanted to show the Russian roulette powerfulness of heroin addiction. And my feeling was, and the reason I titled the book Bullet in the Chamber, is that I felt that if the cops could make the connection between the fatal dose and the pusher, that they should charge the guy with second-degree murder. Because in my opinion, it's like selling a pistol with one bullet in the chamber to someone you know is going to play Russian roulette and you don't care. That's, in my opinion, second-degree murder. But the cops told me in the research that I did for the book that it's not that easy for them to make that kind of a connection, because often the pushers aren't addicts. They induce people, they get them addicted, and then it's the addict that makes the sale. So it's not as cut and dried as I had thought. But that's really the impetus behind that.
And when did that book come out?
That book came out in at the end of 2016, and we are right at the point now where the publisher that I have has given me back the rights, and we're moving my agent and I are moving the entire series to another publisher, sort of one book at a time, so that they'll all be under one roof. Right now, it's an unusual situation in publishing where half of my series is published by one organization, and then another publisher has the other part. So I'm very fortunate that I'm still able to be in print with all 6 books, but we're migrating to a new publisher.
So, John, when did this all happen with your son?
Stephen went missing in August of 2011, and he was missing for a week, and that was out of character for him. He just went off the grid completely and was found dead in my car a block and a half from where we lived in D.C. And that was basically it. It was pretty devastating, as you can imagine, and I went through grief counseling for about 2.5 years before I wrote the book.
So obviously you were aware of his addiction at the time that he was struggling with.
Just briefly.
Oh, just briefly.
I only knew for about a month, and that was because he'd had an emergency room experience. And when I got to the emergency room, the nurses said, "We are very concerned about your son, but we can't tell you why," because he was an adult. He was 22. And so I went to him and I said, "Dude, I can't help you if you don't tell me." And he said, well, he thought about it. And then at the time he was released, he called me into the room with the doctor and then handed me his discharge papers, which said, "Stop using heroin." I'm going, what? I look back on that time and I'm grateful that I didn't kick him out of the house. We had a heart-to-heart conversation, and he was at a point where he really wanted to turn his life around. And so he was going to schedule an appointment with a psychologist, but the guy's schedule was full, and they said, call back in 2 weeks. But a week later, he was dead.
So go ahead, Scott. Go ahead.
I was going to say, my second book, The Opioid Epidemic, came out about 5 years ago. And I don't even think we were actually talking about that when I met you. It just started up where, the Oxycontin was out in the world, and then fentanyl was starting to grow. So, and it's interesting because not many people, from what I've learned over the years, have actually overdosed from heroin. Heroin was not an overdose drug unless an individual just was gotten a hold of a bad batch, or they just weren't cognizant of what they were doing. And so heroin, although a scary drug and always has been, and even some of the experts have said that, it wasn't heroin that started the overdose trauma. It was, the opioid piece of oxy and then into fentanyl. So you were really experiencing something that a lot of families hadn't very early on. So what would you tell a family today that you've learned through your own process that maybe they could be doing differently if they have a son or daughter or a loved one who might be experiencing self-medication through something that's, very dangerous? We know fentanyl, kills a lot of people accidentally and on purpose. But what would you tell families with all your experience?
Well, I think I'm probably the worst person to give advice about parenting. I mean, if you want to, I feel like, if you're going to judge me as a parent, get in line, because I got there first. And I can't say, Scott, that I've really got an answer. I think one thing, though, is keep the lines of communication open. I think that's tremendously important. Because at the time when they hit rock bottom, they need to know that there's someone there who loves them. In spite of everything. I don't know how I feel about tough love. I know that there have been families that have gone through repeated, rehabilitations and then recidivism, I guess, and all kinds of problems. And there's one family I know of up in Vermont where the daughter kept going through rehab and then relapsing. And the mother finally said, "I'm now saving for your funeral." And that's what got her daughter's attention and caused her to change. I think every situation is different. Mine is not a success story, so I don't really have a track record of any kind of, look at how I did it. And I can't even say that I did it wrong. I mean, he was an adult. And so, I mean, my grief counselor, which, we talked a lot about guilt, and she said, what were you going to do? Nail him to the bed? The main thing I think is just keep the lines of communication open. Let them know you love them. And addiction, I think, is a disease. And so in many ways, the person isn't really themselves. They're under the influence. And so that's, I think, part of it. They seem like a different person, and they seem to be sabotaging themselves, but to a certain extent, they're trapped, and I don't know if they really know how to get out of it. And so and I'll say one more thing, and maybe this isn't helpful at all, but I'm a journalist, or at least I was a working journalist, and I'm a realist, and I think that with the powerfulness, especially the unpredictable powerfulness of fentanyl, I hate to say this, but I think you also need to realistically think that this might not end well, and just brace yourself, because it's so powerful. Parents want to be in control, and no one's in control of something like this. And you need to prepare for the worst and hope for the best. I don't know if that's
John, you started answering that question by saying you aren't somebody to ask for advice. So the opposite of that would be, what, in hindsight, what did you miss in hindsight that you wish you did see? Is there something, you said you knew it for about a month. Obviously, he's been using longer than that. Did you miss anything?
I did. I think I minimized some of the things that I did see. There were times when he couldn't put a sentence together. I just chalked it up to him being really tired because he was working double shifts at a restaurant, high-end restaurant, as a cook. I think that I I would have probably insisted on rehab of some sort. Even when I mean, when I knew he was using, he says, well, I've only used it a couple of times and I'm managing it. I was dubious. I said, everything I've heard about heroin is when you take it once, you're hooked. He said, yeah, I've heard that, but I've got it under control. Well, I found out when he was missing, he'd been using for a year. So I should have been, I'm a journalist. People lie to me all the time. And he was lying. And of course, you don't want to believe your kid is lying to you. So I would say I would have been much more skeptical and incredulous of the bullshit that he was telling me. So I think that may be one thing.
I want to, first of all, my latest book, I don't know if you've had a chance to read up on it. It's called "You're Not God, That Job Is Taken."
Yeah, I saw the title. It's
And
excellent. Yeah.
And it came around because it's not your fault. I mean, if we were sitting here talking about diabetes, okay, which is a disease, and it's the one I use with families all the time, it's not your fault. And I try to convey
but
that.
isn't it? I mean, diabetes, isn't that a blood sugar thing? And you can eat a lot of donuts and get diabetes.
Well, yes and no, but it's when I talking about it is a disease that most people don't raise their hand and say, I'll have a dose of that for the rest of my life. It's something that's, and it does pre-exist in some families, like cancer, heart disease, losing your eyesight early, having some sort of issue with, hair loss, things of that nature. But the disease itself is not your fault, is what I'm trying to say. Right. And when you say you can't, you wish you would, you're not a good example. The example that you are that you may not recognize is because of your experience, your lived experience, and what you went through to maintain your own personal self-care to try to process it. Because one of the things that's happened with the opioid crisis, we're still seeing 400 people die a day with opioid overdoses in our country. And when you think about that for a second, it's north of 100,000 on an annualized basis. And, leadership is paying attention to this almost like, well, it's, they've made their choice, like alcoholism and that denial that goes on that, to your point, one of the three things that most self-medicating individuals do well are lying, cheating, and manipulating. So your point about, as a journalist, people always lie. When someone's under the influence, they do lie. There's a shame-based piece around it and the stigma that unless you have those tools. So my example to families is if something's wrong with your car, you don't usually go on YouTube and go out there and pull your engine out and start working on it. You try to get to an expert. You try to get to somebody, even another family who's experienced it. And it's hard because the stigma says you don't want to raise your hand and say you've got a loved one who's addicted to some sort of substance. Yeah. And the level of denial still continues to be high. But we're working with veterans now who have a ton of underlying issues. None of that is their fault. It's part of the experience that happens when you're in the military. Yeah. But when you look at the underlying trauma and what it does to the rest of the family, and usually when I get phone calls, it's not from the person who says, hey, I think I'm doing too many drugs. It's from a family member who says, I don't know how to help my son, daughter, or friend. What do I do? And when they make that phone call, it can help them with tools. There are resources out there, and there are people who have a level of empathy today that we didn't see 20 years. I didn't see 20 years ago. I'm just finished 42 years of continuous sobriety. And what that does for me is it means I have found a way, and like you said it, not when one size doesn't fit all. So how do we make this easier for people to say, I need help? And those are the three magic words that are the hardest to say out loud. And it doesn't matter who in that family or that circle of influence says it, but someone needs to say it and then be willing to step forward. So that's why I was anxious to bring you back and talk with you, because your lived experience is powerful. And I'm not God, so I can't judge you, but in my opinion, you weren't a bad dad. and you weren't a bad parent. You were just somebody who had a son who may have been predisposed, and he didn't know what to do, and he's not going to tell you he's got a problem. And when families pointed out to people, I don't want to sound too codependent now, but I know how hard it can be. My wife and I were just talking today. We're both fixers. We want to fix it. And, part of the reason I think Fred and I get along so well is he wants to help fix it with his platform. And the fact that you're, bringing your books back out again, you'll probably have a platform now that you didn't have before. And you've sorted some shit out that you'll be able to, I think, be a bigger, better resource to families, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, to talk about your experience, strength, and hope.
Thank you. I mean, I needed to hear that. One of the things you said reminded me that at the time Stephen died, we didn't give a cause of death. And, my wife didn't want Stephen to be defined by how he died. And I understand that. But what ended up happening over the years is that people, when there are no facts, people make them up. And so people have told me they thought Stephen was murdered. They thought he committed suicide. And the saving grace, I think, for me is that I've been able to talk about it. I've been able to talk about my sister's suicide and my son's fatal heroin overdose. And that I've discovered when I do talk about this in public, it brings people out of the woodwork. A lot of people have never talked about this stuff before because they're highly stigmatized. And yet it's ubiquitous. I mean, suicide, is chronically a problem, and so is addiction. And yet we suffer in silence. We can be isolated, whether it's the addict or the families. And I think, and your point is well taken, and it's a good reminder that we're not alone. In fact, we need each other because we can't fix it ourselves completely. We need each other.
Is there more to the story of where he was that week? For that week, or?
I mean, no, I don't think so. I mean, he in the month that he was still alive, we talked periodically about how he was doing, and I didn't detect that he was using, and I don't think he was. I think that there were times when he would, really go off of it, and yet I think that it was a siren call to, get that drug again. He had the opportunity, and he went for it. But there was, that was the thing. It crept up on us, and it overtook us before he ever got to the point where he was stealing or, doing anything that was against the law as far as, victimizing other people. He was just victimizing himself.
Yeah, it's tough. Sometimes that industry also, you had mentioned he was in the cook as a high-end cook. The industry itself is very drug-induced.
I wonder why that is. That's what I've heard too.
Well, so I have a son that's in the bar business. Mm-hmm. So I've been through a few things, minor in comparison. But he's very open with me, and he's spoken. Part of the reason is, while everybody else is partying, they're working. So as soon as 2 o'clock comes or whatever, that's when their party hours begin at 2. Yeah. And they start that. And that's where something about that nightlife, it's just overlooked. It's, hey, try this, take this and stuff. Cocaine is enormous in it because it's a high energy job. So they use a drug that's going to give them what they consider energy.
And it was someone at work. It was someone at work who gave him the heroin, and he had said, I found out later, he told his friends, "I'll never do needles." Well, it just kept. It's the law of diminishing returns. You need more and more.
Yeah, and the cost. The cost. Yeah.
It was a lot cheaper. But it was a lot cheaper. It was cheap. Heroin was cheap in comparison to the other stuff.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean is, it could start as a pill, and that's what Scott was trying to make a point on. It starts with an opioid, but that opioid becomes $50 a pill when you could get just as much heroin for 3 days for that price. So it becomes a need. The needle is no longer the fear. It's not having the drug is the fear.
Exactly.
So yeah, it's an unfortunate thing. I hate to hear any parent suffer, especially with blame and stuff, because I understand as a parent how difficult it is to have any control over any one of our childs that are of age to be adults.
Exactly.
We think
the
we
older they
raised
get,
them.
yeah, the older they get, they're trying to individuate. It's
Right. We think we raised them correctly. They were good kids. They were good in school. They were good in this. And it just goes to show you again. And me and Scott say this every week. Drugs don't care who you are. They don't care about your grades. They don't care if you're white, black, green, or brown. They don't care how old you are. There's 70-year-olds. There's a 70-year-old man right now shooting heroin. It's prominent. It's there. And the addiction just does not care how much money you have or how you were brought up. So it's hard to nail. You can't nail one blame, because every addict, every person is an individual that needs to be catered to in a different way. And it all comes down to they need to want the help in order to get the help.
Right. Yeah.
But the big trend in the last decade, I remember hearing the term accidental overdose, and being a former drug addict, that my attitude was like, what are you, accidental? And what's interesting today, the data is showing that, especially, I'll use San Diego as an example. We are a border town, so clearly we have things coming in our community at a much faster rate than most. But, between the dark web now and the internet, you can get whatever you want, wherever you want. But what was interesting, a study was done 3 years ago that in our region, 95% of the illicit drugs now are laced with fentanyl. So you could be taking, a fake pill or a pill that says Xanax, and it's disguised as a portal that has fentanyl in it. I mean, vaping, and with marijuana being legalized, vaping pipes now are showing up with, people overdosing with fentanyl in a marijuana, vaping mechanism. So the scary part today is it's like we're not learning from our mistakes. We're not seeing the outcomes and going, well, what can I do differently? Because peer pressure is peer pressure. And the number one killer of 25 to 48-year-olds right now are, illicit drugs.
Here's the thing I don't understand, and that is if fentanyl is as toxic as it is, why would they be pushing it? Because they're basically losing their clientele when they overdose and die.
That's a great question. And what's interesting is the paradigm just shifted about 2.5 years ago. And now what they're doing is, because you're right, it didn't matter because the consumer was so large, a consumer base. And the cartel has a business, and I've got this from a great source. It's been one of our guests. It's a $40 billion business, and they don't care. It's all about the money. But since the issue with the border has become such a big conversation, they are now lowering the toxicity of fentanyl so they can maintain a consumer longer. But it really doesn't matter, because for every time, and this was shared by people under arrest, that any time an overdose made the media, their sales spiked. It's a business model I wish I could replicate, treating people where, 2 people don't get better, 5 people call here, hey, how do I get some of that?
Does it spike because because people are curious? They want to know what this is.
Yes,
this is all
exactly.
about.
It spikes mostly because addicts believe if it killed him, it must be amazing.
And drug seekers specifically, which are in that 15% category. And when I use that term drug seeker, somebody always calls me and goes, you can't just say that about people. You can't label people. I said, look, I was a drug seeker. Sure. And, you can tell me all you want to tell me, but you go to as many funerals as I've been to. I got in the treatment business, John, because I was tired of going to funerals. And I go to 7 meetings a week, every day, every morning, and I have since COVID virtually, because I want to preserve the integrity of my sobriety.
Right.
because all it takes is one pill, and one pill can kill. And by the way, that campaign was created by the DEA, and the DEA isn't necessarily proactive about getting people into treatment. They have a different defined job, and that's to get the drugs off the streets. The problem is they'll self-disclose, they're only capturing about 5%. So even if the cartels have decreased their distribution to the U.S., which all the data shows they haven't. The only reason that we're seeing reversal of overdoses now is naloxone, which is what's in Narcan. And also because the cartel is lowering the toxicity. They're taking the precursors and distilling them down and making it differently. And I want to close with this. Fentanyl is a synthetic opioid, which means anybody can make it. It's not like cocaine where you have to grow a product and then process it and then ship it and then distribute it. So,
is it easier to make than meth? Is it easier to make than meth?
About the same. But here's what's interesting. Fentanyl with a $5,000 investment because the precursors are so inexpensive, but it's difficult to get them. Once you get them, a $5,000 investment can yield you $1 million in retail sales. And methamphetamine has become so inexpensive. And what they're doing, for example, gangs in Los Angeles with the homeless population is they're fronting. They're giving them the product to distribute and say, once you sell this, come back and buy more because it can be made so inexpensively and it's so easy to produce. Because you can take a small amount and you can cut it, if you will, and or lace it with something else. And the average street user is not going to know. And they don't, there are no guardrails for non-pharmaceutical distribution.
Yeah. Is fentanyl as highly addictive as heroin?
100 times more, thousands times more.
It's 100 times more powerful. And now the new fentanyl with crank in it, which is that alpha tranquilizer, is 100 times stronger than fentanyl that we've seen on the street. That's in the next.
But we're also very aware that the minute we get rid of this, there's another one coming. There's already one coming. We keep thinking of the cartel from the movie aspect, and we forget that the cartel, we've learned this, Scott and I, from talking to several experts. They're a business. They're a legitimate business that employs 250,000 roughly, and that's estimated, people, which is what makes it so difficult for a country to shut them down from one standpoint, because how do you find jobs for 250,000 people? And that's the storefronts, the little guy, the big guy. They're a legitimate, these are not dummies we're dealing with. They're doing nefarious stuff, but they're not stupid.
Right. I know you're supposed to be interviewing me, but I've got another question.
Keep going.
Is there anything about our society that makes people more susceptible to artificial highs for the demand to be as much as it is for something like this that alters a person's reality? Is there something about the reality that we're living in, whether it's a spiritual dimension or deficiency or what? Is there anything about society that makes us more prone to it now than we were 50 years ago or more?
Well, there's data that shows that for some reason America has always been kind of a get a pill, fix a problem. And so the demand is higher here. And other countries don't seem to culturally be as involved, if you will, with the I'm going to call it the drug seeking, addiction, if you will, of finding ways to feel good by taking a pill, and one of the brightest guys I know who sat on the United Nations, International Drug Committee, traveling the world for 2 years, trying to figure out ways how we standardize treatment, talked about the cultural differences that exist in other countries. And I said to him, he's a psychiatrist, runs, a big department here at one of the universities. And he said and shared that the families who sit down to dinner 3 times a week have a much better chance of being able to hear from their children before something explodes. So I think culturally we had that, and I think that's kind of gone away. And I think the internet, which we had more access than most populations, has had a major influence on young people as well. So, I don't know if that's the right answer or not, or a answer, But I think the fact that we feel, look, 25% of our kids are on some form of medication. 18% of the country are seniors, and probably 95% are on some form of medication. Not necessarily for anything that's mood altering, but they are on medication. So we're a medication oriented group of people. And I think that's one of the drivers. Fred, what do you think?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, United States of America is a very openly daring type place also, where we'll let's try this. A lot of that goes on. Marketing. The marketing is genius behind this. There's a marketing strategy, like you were saying, about fronting it to the homeless and stuff. They're marketing this stuff to us. But there's plenty of, even what was the thing the cops did years ago with say no to drugs?
Choir practice. Let me tell that story. I love that story.
Yeah.
Law enforcement, sworn officers for years, they call the choir practice. At the end of their shift, they would always, find a way to kind of decompress. And one of the places they could go was a bar. And that's when the average law enforcement, and I don't know if there's any studies around this, but I've heard this from some people I know and trust. They were working a 5-day week, 8 hours a day. And when they shifted to a 4-day week to 10 hours a day, they didn't have time to go decompress as a group unless they really, focused on it. So it was an interesting phenomenon. And then if you go back and track some of the data, law enforcement has a high level of suicide, like military or veterans. And I point to that as one of the reasons, which is kind of interestingly ironic. And by the way, we haven't even really talked about it, but I think of alcohol as a drug. And you talk about the marketing. My God, Budweiser, is one of the biggest beer distributors, and they have the budget to be able to talk about their products all the time. Look at tobacco. I mean, look what tobacco didn't finally admit that, to the public until they had to, that it was killing people. And then people went to vape, and then vaping's turned out to be a major issue. And then legalizing marijuana. It's like, why do we keep doing these things that seem to be harmful without the educational and prevention tools that should go along with it? But, it's an interesting topic, John. And anytime you want to spend some more time with it, once you get famous again and you have your platform, I'm happy to come talk to you about it. But tell us a little bit about how people can reach you if they want to, and where they should find your book, and how they can call you, and just about their bullshit.
The best way is through my website, which is my name.com, johndedakis.com, JOHN, D as in dog, E, D as in dog, A, KIS as in Sam, johndedakis.com. It's got my books. It's got my upcoming events, the classes that I teach, the speaking that I do, all that kind of stuff. And you can get an email to me through my website.
Awesome. Well, that's great. And I'm so glad you live in. Is there a specific reason why you chose Baltimore? And does it have anything to do with Poe?
No. We lived in D.C., but we couldn't afford it. And my wife got a consulting job here in Baltimore. So not only did we move here, but we could actually afford to buy a place here. So, that's really the reason. I'd already retired from CNN.
Okay. Well, I would have preferred the Edgar Allan Poe angle, but that's okay.
Sorry, I'm not going to make stuff up to please you. Sorry.
We'll take it. Okay, so that's it for today. I appreciate you being here. I'm sorry to hear about your son and the struggle that it caused you in your life, and I'm sure your wife also.
Oh, man.
Are there other children? Do you have other children?
I have two other kids. Emily is living in Belfast, Northern Ireland, and my son James is in Southern Oregon.
Excellent. So family support is important, but we'd love to have you back on when you got another book, when you got something to tell us. Reach out to us.
I got a memoir that's on its way this year.
Great. Reach out to us, and we will have you on, and we'll talk all about it, and we'll promote it the best we can. Just let Scott know. But you got anything, Scott? You want to give your phone number?
I do. Area code 619-993-2738. 619-993-2738. Call me, text me, Go onto my website, yourcrisiscoach.com, and let's talk about it, for heaven's sakes, and know that there's always hope and help.
And that's your personal phone, correct?
That's my cell phone.
You're answering it.
I am, yeah, my staff of one, I am answering it, absolutely. And if not today, tomorrow, for sure. And I love when I get a strange number in my phone that doesn't say spam, because I know it might be a family maybe I can help. And if I can't help you, I will help you find a way to get some help one way or another. So make the call.
Well, we appreciate it. I think it's a very good thing that you do there, and you're doing a good job. Jealous that you're warm. I'm jealous of you. I'm not going to lie. I'm tired of it, and I'm getting frustrated. I'm becoming the get off my lawn old man, and I'm tired of looking at snow. I'm just tired of it, Scott. So that's all I'm going to say.
You always come visit. We can get you a little tent so you can actually sleep outside where it drops to 52 degrees at night.
Sounds beautiful.
You'll love it.
Okay, so I'll still do my cherry sign off because I'm a happy guy. So if nobody has told you they love you, we love you, and we will talk to you again next week.
Thank you for listening to Your Crisis Coach with Scott H. Silverman and Fred Carroll. Until next time, stay safe, be kind, be smart,